This story explores intense themes of psychological distress and unforeseen events. Listener discretion is advised. It started, as most things do, with a quiet hum. Not the hum of a refrigerator or the city outside, but a deeper, stranger vibration that Michael swore he could feel in his bones, even when he was just sitting in his basement, headphones clamped tight against his ears. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist, not really. He was an enthusiast, a digital archaeologist sifting through the static of the airwaves, searching for the forgotten, the untraceable, the signals that shouldn't exist. Most nights, it was just the lonely chatter of distant ham radio operators, the faint whispers of international broadcasts, or the maddening white noise of an empty frequency. But then one Tuesday night, scrolling through the obscure shortwave band, he found it. A sound unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't music, wasn't speech, wasn't Morse code. It was a sequence of cold, clear, synthesized numbers, spoken by a child's voice. 4, 7, 2, 1, 9, 3. Followed by a pause, then another sequence. Always the same voice, always the same unsettling cadence. He called it the echo. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, lost in the glow of his monitor, surrounded by coils of wire and blinking gadgets. Michael became obsessed. He recorded hours of the broadcasts, running them through every signal analysis program he could find, hunting for a pattern, a key, anything that made sense of the relentless, whispered digits. He knew about number stations, of course, remnants of the Cold War, supposedly spy broadcasts to agents in the field. But the echo felt different. It was too precise, too regular, too lonely. There was no static, no interference, just that crystalline, unwavering voice. And then, after months of dead ends, late one night, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate intuition, he found it. A mathematical anomaly in the timing, a subtle shift in the modulation that, when combined with a specific variant of a one-time pad cipher he'd stumbled upon in an archived forum, yielded something. Not words, not names, but coordinates. And a date. And a time. His heart hammered against his ribs. The first decoded message was chillingly mundane. A specific intersection in his own city, a date 3 days in the future, and a time 2:47 p.m. Below it, a single cryptic word. Fender. He scoffed. A fender bender? This was what his obsession had led to? He dismissed it as a random correlation, a fluke of his own desperate pattern-seeking mind. But he marked it on his calendar anyway, a morbid curiosity gnawing at him. 3 days later, at precisely 2:47 p.m., Michael found himself parked discreetly near that intersection. The sun was bright, traffic was light. He felt foolish, ridiculous. He was about to leave when, with a sudden screech of tires, a sedan ran a red light, T-boning a pickup truck right in the middle of the intersection. A classic fender bender. No serious injuries, thankfully, but the timing was exact. The location perfect. The word chillingly accurate. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, tightening its grip. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The echo wasn't just broadcasting numbers. It was broadcasting the future. He went home that night, not with triumph, but with a profound, terrifying certainty. He immediately set to work on the next sequence he'd recorded. This time, the numbers were longer, more complex, the cadence of the child's voice somehow more urgent. The decryption took him an agonizing 12 hours, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind racing. When the final coordinates and date appeared on his screen, along with a chilling single word, Michael felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a fender bender. This wasn't a local incident. This was a massive public place, miles away from his city, and the word decoded beneath the data was collapse. His hands trembled as he stared at the screen, the weight of what he held pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had just decoded the blueprint for a catastrophe, and it was set to happen in less than a week. Collapse. His hands trembled as he stared at the screen, the weight of what he held pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had just decoded the blueprint for a catastrophe, and it was set to happen in less than a week. The single word pulsed on the monitor, a stark digital harbinger of doom. Alongside it, the coordinates, a date, and a precise time. It wasn't vague. It wasn't a cryptic metaphor. It was a direct instruction, a chillingly specific prediction. The number station, his longtime obsession, his quiet refuge from the mundane, had just delivered a message that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his reality. His first instinct was a desperate scramble for disbelief. had to be a mistake, a glitch in his algorithm, a misinterpretation of the data. He reread the sequence, cross-referenced the frequency logs, reran the decryption protocols. Each time the same result, the same devastating clarity. The numbers didn't lie. His algorithm, the one he'd painstakingly developed over years of solitary nights, was mercilessly accurate. A cold dread seeped into his bones, replacing the initial shock with a paralyzing fear. This wasn't just an intellectual puzzle anymore. This was real. A ticking bomb. He imagined the headlines, the chaos, the sheer human cost. Millions. Potentially millions would be affected by a complete and utter system failure. A blackout not just of electricity but of order itself. The coordinates pointed to a densely populated region in the American Midwest, a vital hub of commerce and infrastructure. A collapse there wouldn't just be local. It would ripple outwards, a catastrophic domino effect. He paced his small apartment, the silence amplifying the frantic rhythm of his own heartbeat. What was he supposed to do? Who could he possibly tell? Hello. I've decoded a message from an anonymous shortwave radio broadcast that says a major power grid is going to collapse next week. He could almost hear the dismissive laughter, the polite but firm suggestion that he seek professional help. He'd be branded a crank, a conspiracy theorist, or worse, investigated himself for knowing too much. How could he possibly present this information without sounding utterly insane? The source was a ghost, a whisper on the airwaves, untraceable, unverified. He needed proof. Or at the very least, a second opinion from someone who understood his world, someone who wouldn't immediately write him off. His mind immediately went to Dr. Evelyn Reed, his former professor, a brilliant mind in cryptology and signal intelligence, but also a fiercely independent thinker, known for her unconventional approaches and healthy skepticism of official narratives. If anyone would even consider his story, it would be Evelyn. She was a maverick and perhaps his only hope. He knew her number by heart, a faded memory from his university days, etched into his brain through countless late-night office hours and challenging debates. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button on his phone. Calling her would pull her into the dark vortex of uncertainty and potential danger he now found himself in. Was that fair? Was it responsible? The clock on his wall seemed to tick louder, each second a painful hammer blow against the silence. Less than a week. The precious time was slipping away, minute by agonizing minute. He had to act. The burden of this knowledge was too immense to bear alone. He tried to analyze the peripheral data once more, the subtle shifts in modulation, the underlying noise, looking for a signature, a clue to the sender. But it was like trying to catch smoke. The broadcast was expertly masked, every trace of its origin meticulously erased. It was a perfectly clean signal, almost too perfect. That, in itself, was unsettling. The thought that he was the only one who knew, the only one who had connected these disparate dots, was terrifyingly isolating. A solitary burden, heavier than anything he'd ever experienced. He remembered the fleeting shadows he'd dismissed as exhaustion, the irrational feeling of being watched he'd attributed to too much coffee and too little sleep. Now they felt real, chillingly prescient. Was this number station broadcasting to him specifically? Or was he just another anonymous listener who happened to crack the code, a random recipient of a targeted warning? He pulled up digital maps, cross-referencing the coordinates with geographical data, population density, critical infrastructure layouts. The scale of the impending disaster solidified in his mind. Hospitals, transportation networks, communication systems. All would go dark, plunging millions into an unprecedented crisis. The word collapse resonated with brutal clarity. Not just a power outage, a systemic failure, a complete unraveling. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a terrifying realization that his quiet life, a series of predictable routines spent chasing ghosts in the airwaves, had suddenly been hijacked. A ghost had reached out and handed him a nightmare. He had to reach out to Evelyn. She was his only hope for an intelligent, discreet second opinion. He couldn't go to the authorities without something more, something tangible. He needed her expertise, her rigorous skepticism, her unconventional mind to poke holes in his theory, or, God forbid, confirm it. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over her contact name for what felt like an eternity. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The point of no return. What if she thought he was delusional? What if involving her put her in danger? But the alternative, silence, allowing the catastrophe to unfold, was unthinkable. He couldn't live with that. The guilt would be a far worse collapse than any power grid. He pressed call. The phone rang 3 times, each ring echoing the growing tension inside him. Then a soft, slightly gravelly voice answered. "Read." He launched into an explanation, trying to sound calm, professional, but the urgency bled through his carefully chosen words. He mentioned the number station, the unusual pattern, the anomaly he'd discovered. He deliberately avoided the word collapse for now, attempting to pique her scientific curiosity first, to hook her with the intellectual challenge of the cryptology. Evelyn listened patiently, her silence punctuated by sharp, precise questions. She didn't dismiss him outright, which was an immense relief. She asked about the specific frequency, the modulation, the encoding method he'd encountered. He explained his proprietary algorithm, the one he'd been refining for years, the one that had finally cracked this impossible code. She knew his work. She knew his reputation for meticulousness, for an almost obsessive attention to detail. Finally, after a long thoughtful pause, she spoke. "Interesting. Very interesting, Michael. You've certainly got my attention. Is there anything else you found that might be unusual?" Her tone was measured, but he could detect a subtle shift, a hint of something more serious beneath her academic curiosity. He took a deep breath, the moment of truth arriving faster than he'd anticipated. "Yes, Evelyn. There's a specific set of coordinates, a date, a time, and a single word. It's not just an anomaly. It's a warning." Silence again on the other end. A different kind of silence this time, heavier, pregnant with unspoken implications. "What word, Michael?" she asked, her voice lower now, edged with something he couldn't quite place. Concern, perhaps, or a dawning realization. "Collapse," he whispered, the sound almost swallowed by the phone line, yet it felt like a thunderclap in the quiet of his apartment. Another pause, even longer than before. Then her voice, firmer now, devoid of its previous academic detachment. "Can you send me your raw data? Everything. The audio, the decoded text, your algorithm's output. And then I think we need to meet. Not at my office, not at your place. Somewhere neutral. Do you remember the old diner? The Midnight Grill? Near the university? Midnight. No later." His relief was immense, quickly replaced by a fresh wave of anxiety. She wasn't dismissing him. She was taking it seriously. And she was suggesting a clandestine meeting. This was far bigger than he had imagined. This wasn't just a number station anymore. It was something that required secrecy, caution. "Yes, Evelyn. I remember it. I'll be there," he said, his voice steadier now, a new resolve hardening his tone. "Good," she replied, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "And Michael, be careful. Very careful. If you're right, this isn't just a number station anymore. This is something else entirely." The line went dead. He stared at his phone, a fresh wave of realization washing over him. Evelyn's words, "something else entirely," echoed in his mind. He wasn't just chasing a signal anymore. He was being drawn into a dangerous game, a silent, invisible war. The number station wasn't just predicting a collapse. It was initiating a chain reaction that had just pulled him, and now Evelyn, into its orbit. He spent the next few hours meticulously compiling the data, triple-checking everything. Every line of code, every audio snippet, every decoded character. He felt a desperate, almost frantic need for precision, as if any error on his part could do millions. As he worked, a new unsettling thought gnawed at him. Why him? Why was he the one to decode this? Was it his unique algorithm? Or was there something more personal, something deliberate about this message finding its way to his receiver? The number station, always a mystery, now felt like a sentient entity watching, waiting, its unseen eyes fixed solely on him. He looked out his window into the darkening city. The familiar glow of streetlights, the distant hum of traffic, the comforting rhythm of urban life. All of it suddenly seemed fragile, ephemeral. He was holding a secret that could shatter it all. And he was meeting Evelyn in a few hours, under the cover of darkness, to discuss a catastrophe no one would believe. The weight of it pressed down, a suffocating blanket of dread. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant, caught in the crosshairs of a silent, invisible war. The countdown wasn't just for the collapse. It was for his own future, now inextricably linked to the chilling whispers of the airwaves. The chilling whispers of the airwaves had planted a seed of terror in Michael's mind. He stared at the handwritten notes, the coordinates, the date, the single terrifying word: collapse. It was July 1st. He had 13 days. 13 days until whatever this catastrophic event was meant to unfold, 13 days to prevent it, or at least to understand it. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket woven from static and fear. His first impulse was to call someone, anyone. The police? The FBI? He imagined the conversation. Yes, hello, I've been listening to a number station, and it gave me coordinates and a date for a collapse. No, I don't know what kind of collapse. Yes, I'm serious. They would laugh him off or worse, tag him as a crank or a potential threat himself. He was alone in this. His fingers, trembling slightly, moved to his keyboard. He typed the coordinates into a mapping application. The satellite image zoomed in slowly at first, then with a jolt, settling on a sprawling complex in a desolate industrial park just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. It wasn't a skyscraper or a famous landmark, or anything immediately recognizable as a target for a conventional attack. Instead, it was a fortress of glass and steel, an architectural marvel of stark, minimalist design, surrounded by high walls and an almost invisible perimeter of security. The complex bore a name, emblazoned in elegant, modern font on a sign near its main gate: Omnicorp Data Solutions. Omnicorp. The name resonated with a faint, unsettling familiarity. He'd seen their logo on financial news channels, read articles about their groundbreaking artificial intelligence, their revolutionary new quantum computing protocols. They were at the forefront of global technology, specifically in financial trading and secure data storage. A data center. Not just any data center, but the data center, the flagship facility for one of the most powerful tech companies on the planet. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones. A collapse at Omnicorp Data Solutions. It wasn't just a building falling down. It was something far more insidious, something that could ripple through the global economy, through the very fabric of digital existence. A data collapse. A systemic failure. A financial apocalypse triggered by a silent, invisible force. The implications were staggering, far more terrifying than a localized explosion. This was an attack on the nervous system of the modern world. He spent the next few hours in a feverish frenzy of research, his apartment transforming into a war room. Every search term led him deeper into a labyrinth of technical jargon and alarming possibilities. Omnicorp was poised to launch a new, highly anticipated, AI-driven global trading platform on July 15th, one day after the predicted collapse date. The timing wasn't a coincidence, it was a cruel, precise mockery. If Omnicorp's central data hub went down on July 14th, the launch would be catastrophic, potentially triggering a market crash of unprecedented scale. The world's financial systems, already teetering on the edge of instability, could be plunged into chaos. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a sickening sense of responsibility. He had stumbled onto something monumental, something that could reshape history. He wasn't just a casual listener anymore. He was an unwilling gatekeeper to a secret that threatened to unravel everything. He needed more information. The number station had provided the target and the date, but not the how. How would the collapse happen? Was it an external attack, a cyber attack, or something internal? And who was behind it? The thought of an organized, shadowy group capable of orchestrating such a sophisticated event sent shivers down his spine. Over the next few days, Michael became a ghost in his own life. He called in sick to his job, citing a vague illness. He barely slept, fueled by cheap coffee and an escalating paranoia. His apartment, usually a haven of quiet solitude, now felt like a cage, every shadow a potential observer, every creak of the floorboards a warning. He felt watched, hunted, even though he had no evidence. The feeling was primal, an instinct honed by the sheer weight of the secret he carried. He tried to find any public information about Omnicorp's security, any vulnerabilities, anything that might hint at a weakness. The company boasted state-of-the-art defenses, impenetrable firewalls, redundant systems. It seemed impossible that such a facility could simply collapse. Unless the collapse wasn't digital, unless it was physical. One evening, while sifting through old, obscure tech forums, he stumbled upon a cryptic post, dated several months prior, from a user named Echo_Chamber. The post was a rambling, paranoid diatribe about Omnicorp, claiming their AI was too powerful, uncontrolled, and that their new data center was a ticking time bomb built on stolen ideas. It also mentioned the old frequency, a phrase that made Michael's blood run cold. Was this connected to the number station? He tried to contact Echo Chamber, but the account had been deleted. The forum thread was locked, marked spam. Yet one line from the post stuck with him. They're building it on hollow ground, a monument to their hubris, a beacon for the unseen. Hollow ground. What did that even mean? He pulled up the satellite imagery of Omnicorp Data Solutions again, zooming in, scrutinizing every detail. The building itself was impressive, a marvel of modern engineering. But as he scrolled around the perimeter, his eyes caught something peculiar. There was an older, smaller structure, partially obscured by trees, on the very edge of the property, almost an afterthought. It looked like an abandoned utility building, perhaps a relic from a previous tenant of the industrial park. It was too small to be significant, too old to be part of Omnicorp's cutting-edge operations. But something about its position, its isolation, niggled at him. He cross-referenced the coordinates from the number station again. He had focused on the main Omnicorp building, assuming that was the target. But what if the coordinates weren't for the main target, but for something else related to the target? He adjusted the pinpoint on the map slightly. The coordinates, precise to several decimal points, didn't land exactly on the center of Omnicorp. They landed on the edge of the property, almost directly over that small, forgotten building. A new wave of unease washed over him. Why that building? What could be hidden there? It was too small to house anything critical for Omnicorp, yet its location was undeniably tied to the overall property. Was it a point of entry? A hidden weakness? He started looking for any public records related to that specific parcel of land, or the older building. It was difficult, the information buried under layers of corporate acquisitions and property transfers. But eventually he found something. The original deed for that small, isolated structure dated back to the 1970s. It wasn't always a utility building. It had been, briefly, a privately owned amateur radio station, licensed to a man named Arthur Vance. The name sparked a faint memory. Arthur Vance. Michael had seen that name before, in the margins of some of the more esoteric shortwave radio forums he frequented, often associated with discussions about unconventional signal transmissions and experimental frequencies. A former radio station, on the grounds of Omnicorp Data Solutions, and the number station coordinates pointed directly to it. The coincidence was too profound to ignore. Could this dilapidated building be more than just an old relic? Could it be the source of the numbers broadcast? Or, even more chilling, could it be the mechanism for the impending collapse? The thought sent a jolt through him. If the number station was broadcasting from that location, then the perpetrators were physically present, or at least had access to the Omnicorp property. This wasn't just a remote cyber attack. It was an operation with a physical footprint. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't go to the authorities with a half-baked theory about a number station and an old radio shack. He had to see it for himself. He had to get closer to Omnicorp, to that forgotten building, to understand the true nature of the threat. The idea was reckless, dangerous, but the alternative, doing nothing, letting the world plunge into chaos, was unthinkable. He packed a small bag, his old shortwave radio, a pair of binoculars, and a cheap burner phone. He booked a flight to Phoenix under a false name, paying in cash. As he drove to the airport, the landscape blurring outside his window, he felt a strange mix of fear and grim determination. He was no longer just a listener in his apartment. He was moving into the field, driven by an invisible force, a silent countdown. The flight to Phoenix was long, the drone of the engines a monotonous hum against the frantic beating of his heart. He tried to sleep, but his mind raced, replaying the cryptic messages, the coordinates, the chilling implications of Omnicorp. He imagined the vast, silent server farms humming with untold power, a digital heart ready to be stopped. Upon arrival, the dry heat of Arizona hit him like a physical blow. He rented a nondescript car and drove towards the industrial park, the setting sun painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple. The Omnicorp campus loomed in the distance, a futuristic monument against the ancient landscape. It looked impregnable, a fortress of humanity's digital ambition. He found a desolate stretch of road several miles from the main gate, obscured by a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees. From here, he could see the entire complex, its sleek surfaces reflecting the last rays of sunlight. And there, almost swallowed by the shadows, was the outline of the small, dilapidated building, exactly where the coordinates had indicated. It was unassuming, almost invisible, yet it pulsed with an unspoken menace in Michael's mind. He set up his shortwave radio, extending the antenna, feeling the familiar click and hum of the device. He tuned to the frequency he knew so well, the one that had haunted his nights. The airwaves were silent, a hollow emptiness where the numbers should have been. It was too early for the broadcast, he knew, but the silence felt heavier, more ominous than the static. As darkness fell, the Omnicorp building lit up, a beacon of glowing glass and steel. But Michael's gaze remained fixed on the small, dark structure at its periphery. He waited, his breath held tight in his chest, for the appointed time for the numbers to return. He needed to confirm his theory, to hear it again from this new terrifying proximity. Then, just before midnight, a faint crackle broke the silence. The familiar, synthesized voice began its chilling recitation. But this time it wasn't just numbers. Interspersed with the digits, barely audible beneath the monotone drone, was a series of rapid-fire clicks and bursts of static, like a frantic Morse code. It was a new layer, a new level of complexity, and it sent a fresh wave of dread through Michael. The number station wasn't just predicting a collapse. It was active at the site. It wasn't just an oracle, it was a participant. And as he listened, straining to decipher the new sounds, he realized they weren't random. They were rhythmic, almost mechanical, like the winding of an unseen clock. A countdown not just to a date but to a precise, terrifying moment happening right there, right now, beneath the very ground he stood on. The rhythmic thrum beneath Michael's feet surged. No longer a distant pulse but a violent tremor that shook him to his core. It wasn't just the ground. The very air around him seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible energy. Dust, disturbed from decades of slumber, danced in the fading twilight, caught in the frantic vibration. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the growing roar that now erupted from deep below. It wasn't the sound of machinery, not entirely, but something far more primal, like the earth itself was groaning in agony, or perhaps in a terrifying birth. Michael stumbled, his flashlight beam wildly slicing through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the crumbling concrete walls of the abandoned bunker and trance he'd found. He clutched his old, battered shortwave radio, its static suddenly intensifying, crackling with an angry energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The numbers station, his constant companion for months, was still broadcasting, but its steady, monotonous tone had begun to waver, a subtle distortion creeping into its relentless cadence. It was like a voice breaking, or a signal struggling against an overwhelming interference. He dropped to his knees, scrambling for the tattered notebook he'd been clutching. His meticulously recorded sequences, the dates, the times, the coordinates, they swam before his eyes. He'd spent countless sleepless nights dissecting them, trying to find the pattern, the meaning. He believed he was decoding a warning, a prophecy. But now, with the ground convulsing beneath him, he realized he'd been wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The numbers weren't just a prediction. They were an instruction. He frantically flipped through pages, his fingers smudged with dirt and sweat. The last sequence he'd cracked, the one that had led him to this forgotten patch of land, wasn't a timestamp for an event. It was a frequency, a specific resonant frequency, overlaid with a series of numerical values that, in his initial analysis, he'd dismissed as calibration data. But now, as the low hum beneath him swelled into a tangible physical pressure against his eardrums, he understood. Those weren't calibration numbers. They were activation protocols. The ground around him began to fracture. Not in a violent, explosive rupture, but in slow, deliberate groans, like a giant awakening from a deep slumber. Thin fissures snaked across the dry earth, spiderwebbing outwards from an unseen epicenter directly beneath where Michael stood. A faint, ethereal light, a ghostly blue, began to pulse from within these growing cracks, illuminating the dust motes in the air, giving the entire scene a surreal, otherworldly glow. It was cold, that light, devoid of warmth yet intensely bright. Michael felt a profound, primal terror seize him, a cold dread that rooted him to the spot even as every instinct screamed for him to run. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant, caught in the very mechanism he'd spent so long trying to uncover. He was standing on the precipice of its activation. The hum intensified, rising in pitch until it was a sustained, resonant tone that vibrated through his bones, through his very teeth. It was the exact unmistakable carrier wave frequency of the number's station, amplified a millionfold, no longer an abstract signal but a physical force. It felt like his internal organs were being gently, but firmly rearranged. A dizzying disorientation washed over him, a feeling of being unmoored from his own body, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a gale. His radio, still clutched in his hand, shrieked with feedback, then went dead. The small digital display on his phone, which he'd pulled out in a desperate, futile attempt to call for help, flickered erratically, pixelating into a chaotic mess before winking out entirely. All electronics within a rapidly expanding radius were being overwhelmed, silenced by this colossal unseen power. The cracks in the earth widened, the blue light growing stronger, pushing outwards. A section of the ground, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, directly in front of him, began to move. Slowly, majestically, it rose from the earth, shedding layers of soil and rock like an ancient skin. It wasn't just a chunk of earth. It was a perfectly circular disk, rising with an impossible smoothness, revealing something beneath it that defied all known engineering. It was a structure, not made of concrete or steel or any material Michael had ever encountered. It was seamless obsidian dark, yet absorbed light in a way that made it seem like a void, a hole in reality. And from its perfectly smooth surface, that same cold blue light pulsed, emanating from an unseen source within. It hummed, a deep resonant thrum that now completely overshadowed the sound of the earth. The number station Michael had been tracking for so long suddenly shifted. Its monotonous voice, which had been wavering, now accelerated into a frantic rapid-fire sequence of digits, a torrent of data that sounded less like a broadcast and more like a massive instantaneous download. It was no longer a warning, it was a command, a final burst of information being fed into the structure now emerging before him. Michael felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards the rising structure, a sensation that wasn't painful but profoundly unsettling. His mind felt stretched, his perceptions altered. He could feel the numbers, the very data stream from the station, imprinting themselves onto his consciousness, a torrent of alien information flooding his thoughts. It wasn't just a device, it was an interface. The circular structure, now fully revealed, stood about 10 feet tall, a monolithic, alien pillar in the desolate landscape. Its surface was utterly featureless, save for the constant rhythmic pulse of blue light that seemed to emanate from its very core. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It was something far more terrifying, far more insidious. Michael stared at the impossible construct, the reality of his discovery crashing over him like a tidal wave. The number station hadn't predicted a catastrophic event. It had merely been the key. It had been counting down, not to an explosion but to an unveiling. The activation of a device designed for something beyond human comprehension. As the resonant tone intensified further, now vibrating not just through his body, but through the very fabric of the air itself, Michael felt a profound shift within him. A sense of being reconfigured, his perceptions altered, his understanding of reality irrevocably changed. He was caught in its initial effect, unable to move, unable to scream, as the impossible mechanism began its true work. The numbers from the station, now a deafening roar in his mind, were not just activating this structure. They were activating something far greater, something that promised to rewrite the world. His scream was swallowed by a sudden violent silence. Not the absence of sound, but an overwhelming presence of it, compressed and distilled into a single resonant frequency that vibrated through his very bones. The air crackled with an energy that wasn't electricity, but pure, raw information, swirling around him like an invisible tempest. The metallic scent in the chamber intensified, mingling with something acrid, almost ozone-like. Michael felt his consciousness stretch, pulled taut like a bowstring, then snap. He wasn't just hearing the numbers anymore. He was inside them. He was a waveform, a data point, an equation being solved in real time by the colossal mechanism that thrummed before him. Colors that didn't exist in the visible spectrum exploded behind his eyes. Hues of probability, shades of causality, the shimmering iridescence of potential futures. He saw lines of force, not physical but informational, connecting every event, every decision, every ripple in the fabric of existence. The numbers, once a cryptic code, unfurled into a vast, intricate tapestry, a living blueprint of reality. He didn't just understand them, he became them. He saw the world not as a sequence of events, but as a constantly updating data stream, a colossal algorithm running on an incomprehensibly vast quantum computer. And the machine before him, the one he had just activated, was a node in that network, a terminal. It wasn't just receiving, it was editing. The rewriting wasn't a metaphor. He saw flickers of moments, tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in the past, a butterfly's wingbeat that nudged a hurricane's path, a forgotten word in a conversation that altered a lifelong trajectory. These weren't grand, cataclysmic changes, not yet. They were subtle nudges, corrections, optimizations. But the sheer scale of them, the infinitesimal alterations happening simultaneously across countless timelines, was dizzying. He saw an old man deciding to take a different street, avoiding a chance encounter that would have led to a business deal. He saw a child dropping a toy, causing a delay that meant their parent missed a flight. Each shift was small, seemingly innocuous, yet each one was a thread being pulled, rewoven into the larger fabric. The numbers weren't just predicting the future. They were constructing it, one meticulously calculated alteration at a time. This wasn't fate, it was engineering. A searing pain lanced through his skull, a mental overload as his brain struggled to process the torrent of raw data. His vision blurred, the vibrant, impossible colors fracturing into shards of light. He felt a profound sense of violation, as if his very identity was being overwritten. His memory sifting through the machine's immense processing power, being categorized, analyzed, perhaps even subtly modified. He fought against it, a primal scream caught in his throat, but his body was unresponsive, locked in place, a conduit for the impossible energy. He was a witness, a participant, and a victim all at once. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. The deafening hum subsided to a low thrum. The impossible colors faded, replaced by the familiar, if still unnerving, glow of the bunker's emergency lights. He fell to his knees, gasping, his hands instinctively clamping over his ears, as if to physically block out the echoes of what he had just experienced. His mind was a maelstrom of fractured images, half-formed equations, and the chilling certainty that the world he knew, the reality he inhabited, was far more malleable than he had ever conceived. He was still Michael, he thought, trying to ground himself, but a new layer had been etched onto his perception, like a watermark on his soul. He could see the numbers now, not just hear them. They were everywhere, the invisible scaffolding of existence. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling, his head throbbing with a dull ache. The central mechanism, the massive, intricate device, now pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, its previously frantic movements having settled into a deliberate, almost organic flow. It looked inert, yet he knew with a terrifying certainty that it was still active, still weaving. The air still tasted of ozone, a phantom residue of the impossible energies unleashed. "Michael, are you okay?" The voice, distant and muffled, was Sarah's. He spun around, disoriented, his eyes struggling to adjust. She was standing at the entrance to the main chamber, her face etched with concern, a heavy-duty flashlight clutched in her hand. Her hair was disheveled, and there were smudges of dirt on her cheek, suggesting she had been through her own ordeal. He hadn't heard her approach, hadn't registered anything beyond the internal chaos. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice hoarse, you shouldn't be here." She ignored his warning, rushing towards him, her eyes scanning the room, then fixing on the now calm mechanism. "What happened?" "I heard something. A low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache." The power flickered across the entire complex. "I was in the secondary comms room trying to re-establish a link, when everything went haywire." She reached him, her hand going to his forehead. "You're burning up, and you look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Michael whispered, pulling away gently. "I think I've seen the blueprint for reality, and I think it just got a rewrite." He stumbled back towards the console, his fingers flying over the holographic interface, seeking answers, seeking confirmation of the impossible truth that had just been downloaded directly into his consciousness. The data streams were different now. Where before there had been raw, indecipherable numerical sequences, there were now patterns, correlations, complex algorithms that seemed to describe not just what would happen, but what was being made to happen. The numbers were no longer merely predictive. They were prescriptive. Sarah looked over his shoulder, her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the new data. "What are you talking about, Michael?" "The machine. It's still running, but it's not transmitting anything we can understand. It's just cycling." "No, Sarah, it's not just cycling," he corrected, his voice gaining a frantic edge. It's working. It's not a receiver, it's a transmitter. It's not just listening to the numbers, it's broadcasting them. It's not predicting the future, it's sculpting it. I saw it, felt it. Tiny, almost imperceptible nudges in the fabric of causality. Small changes that ripple outwards, altering probabilities, guiding events. It's like a cosmic control panel, manipulating the variables of existence. Sarah stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief mixed with dawning horror. Manipulating reality? That's impossible. That's godlike power. Who could build something like this? And why? The organization, Michael said, his eyes still glued to the glowing console. The ones who built this bunker, who funded all of this. They weren't just trying to understand the number station. They were trying to control it. Or rather, control through it. He pointed to a complex subroutine that had just appeared on the screen, a cascade of nested functions that seemed to describe a feedback loop. This isn't just about collecting data. This is about inputting data. It's a two-way street. The number station was just one channel. This machine. This is the master switch. A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. So, all those predictions, all those events we thought were random or fate, they could have been engineered? Not necessarily directly engineered, not yet, Michael clarified, his mind racing, trying to synthesize the overwhelming information. More like steered. Imagine a river. You can't stop the flow, but you can build dams, divert channels, influence where the water goes. This machine is doing that with the river of time, the flow of causality. It's not changing the past, but it's subtly guiding the present to shape the future they desire. Whose future, Michael? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. And what happens when someone decides to nudge that river towards something catastrophic? What if they're already doing it? The question hung heavy in the air, a chilling echo of the vast, terrifying power they had just unleashed. Michael looked up from the console, his gaze meeting Sarah's. His eyes held a new kind of intensity, a depth of understanding that was both profound and deeply unsettling. I don't know, he admitted, his voice strained, but I think we just became part of their experiment. And I think the world as we know it is about to be very different. Suddenly, a new alert flashed across the console, overriding the complex data streams. It was a single stark message, glowing red against the holographic display. An incoming transmission, not from the number station, but from a secured external network. A network that shouldn't have been able to access this system. The message was encrypted, but a single line of text had broken through. A chilling declaration that made Michael's blood run cold. Asterisk, welcome to the new reality. Your activation was successful. Phase 1 complete. Asterisk. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Who is that? What do they mean? Your activation? Michael stared at the message, a dawning horror creeping into his eyes. He wasn't just an observer. He wasn't just a catalyst. He had been a key. The numbers, the discovery, the relentless drive to find this bunker. It had all been orchestrated. He had been played. He had been a pawn in a game he was only just beginning to comprehend. A game whose stakes were nothing less than the very fabric of existence. The rewriting wasn't just about the world. It was about him too. And the ones pulling the strings had just announced their presence. Michael felt a cold dread so profound it bypassed fear and plunged directly into a chilling existential despair. The world was a canvas, and he, a mere brushstroke, was being erased, redrawn, at the whim of unseen artists. They hadn't just announced their presence, they had announced their ownership. His apartment, once his sanctuary, now felt like a stage, every corner a potential vantage point for unseen eyes. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window, searching for a stranger, a subtle shift in his features that would confirm the rewriting had begun. Nothing. Yet, an icy certainty gripped him. The man in the glass wasn't entirely his anymore. He stumbled to his desk, fingers trembling as he pulled up old photos on his laptop. Pictures of him and his college roommate, David Miller, laughing on a beach trip. He remembered the exact date, the silly inside joke they'd shared that day. But as he zoomed in, a detail flickered, then solidified. David was wearing a bright red t-shirt in the photo. Michael distinctly recalled it being blue. A small detail, insignificant to anyone else, but to Michael it was a seismic shift. He remembered arguing with David about the blue shirt. A playful jab about its faded color. Now it was red. Had it always been red? He frantically scrolled through other photos, his heart hammering against his ribs. His family vacation to Yellowstone. His sister, Emily, was wearing a yellow hat. No, wait, he was sure it was green. He remembered teasing her about the bright green clashing with her red hair. Now undeniably yellow. The memories themselves weren't gone, but their details were being subtly, terrifyingly altered. It wasn't just the world, it was his past. His personal history was a malleable thing in their hands. Panic seized him. If his memories weren't his own, what was? His identity? His sanity? He needed to talk to someone, anyone. He picked up his phone, his finger hovering over David's contact. But what would he say? "Hey David, remember that beach trip? Was your shirt red or blue?" David would think he'd lost his mind. And what if David's memories had been rewritten too? What if he remembered the red shirt and always had? The thought was a suffocating blanket. He was alone in this. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. Then the static. From his ancient shortwave radio, dormant for hours, a sudden burst of white noise, cutting through the heavy silence of his apartment. He froze, every nerve ending screaming. This wasn't the usual scheduled broadcast. This was different. Urgent. Personal. He leaned in, his breath catching in his throat. The familiar, eerie tones began, but with a new chilling cadence. Not the usual sequence of numbers. This was a pattern, a rhythm that felt deliberate. Code, yes, but one custom-made. Asterisk 471. Delta Echo 9. Alpha 20. Michael Anderson. Michael Anderson. Michael Anderson. Asterisk. His name. Spoken, or rather synthesized, in the same flat, emotionless female voice that delivered the numbers. 3 times. An undeniable, direct address. His blood ran cold. They knew his name. They knew he was listening. The sequence continued, faster now. A dizzying array of letters and numbers, devoid of the usual structure. Then a single clear phrase repeated twice. Asterisk, the architect's key is within the stone. The architect's key is within the stone. Asterisk. And then silence. Just the hiss of the short wave, the gentle hum of his laptop. The air in the room felt impossibly heavy, charged with an unseen presence. The architect's key. Within the stone. What did that even mean? Was it a riddle? A command? A threat? He replayed the message in his mind, the synthesized voice echoing in his skull. Michael Anderson. They weren't just observing. They were communicating. And they were inviting him into their game, a game where his own reality was the prize. He felt a new surge of adrenaline cutting through the fear. Not just a victim, but now a player. A pawn perhaps, but a pawn that could still move. The thought, however small, sparked a flicker of defiance. If they wanted him to play, he would play. But he would play on his own terms, or at least try to. He needed to analyze the new sequence, the personalized code. But first, he needed to verify the rewriting wasn't just in his head. He had to talk to David. Even if David remembered the red shirt, Michael needed to hear it, to see if his friend acted any differently, if there was any subtle cue that David's reality had been tampered with. He called David. The phone rang 3 times before David's cheerful voice answered. "Hey Michael. What's up, man?" "Hey David. Just a random question. Remember that beach trip we took in college? With Jessica and Emily?" "Yeah man, good times." "Why? What color t-shirt were you wearing in the photos from that day?" Michael held his breath, his knuckles white against the desk. David chuckled. "Seriously? What kind of question is that?" "It was my lucky red one, remember? The one with the faded band logo? You always gave me crap for wearing it so much." "Red. It was red." Michael's stomach dropped. He remembered the blue. He vividly remembered the blue. The playful argument about it. But David's memory was firm, unwavering. And David's voice held no hint of deception, no uncertainty. It was the truth as David knew it. Right, Michael managed, his voice a strained whisper. "Just came up in conversation. Gotta run, man. Talk later." He hung up before David could ask any more questions. The confirmation was devastating. It wasn't just his memories, it was the shared reality. David remembered the red shirt because for David it had always been red. The world and everyone in it was being subtly, meticulously edited around him. He was the only one who seemed to retain the original data. Or was he? Was his memory the corrupted one? No, the sheer specificity of his original memories, the emotional resonance, argued against it. He knew what he remembered. The architect's key is within the stone. He looked around his apartment again, a sudden paranoia making every shadow seem to writhe. There had to be a way out, a way to fight this. He wasn't going to let them erase him, rewrite him into someone he wasn't. He pulled out a notepad and a pen, his mind racing. He needed to document everything. Every shift, every alteration, every message. He wrote down the new number station sequence. *471, Delta Echo 9, Alpha 20, Michael Anderson. The architect's key is within the stone. Asterisk. The phrase "the architect's key is within the stone" resonated with something ancient, almost mythological. Felt like a deliberate puzzle, a breadcrumb. But what stone? Where? He thought about the nature of the rewriting. If they could alter the past, alter memories, what was their limit? Could they alter physics? Could they alter him physically? He ran his hands over his face, his arms. Nothing felt different. Yet, he knew he couldn't stay in his apartment. It was compromised. They knew he was here. They had addressed him directly. He was no longer just a listener, he was involved. He was a piece on their board. He needed to go somewhere they wouldn't expect. Somewhere he could think, somewhere he could research. The phrase "within the stone" nagged at him. It sounded like a physical location, or perhaps a symbolic one. He started packing a small bag, tossing in his laptop, his shortwave radio, a few changes of clothes, and his precious journal where he'd been tracking the number station. He felt a desperate urgency. Every minute he stayed, the more vulnerable he became, the more his reality might erode. As he zipped up his bag, his gaze fell upon a small, smooth river stone sitting on his bookshelf. It was a souvenir from a hiking trip he'd taken years ago, a trip he now questioned the exact details of. He'd picked it up from a remote stream bed in the Appalachian foothills, a place he hadn't thought about in years. He picked up the stone. It was cool and smooth in his hand, just a simple gray stone. But the phrase echoed. The architect's key is within the stone. Could it be this literal? Could this stone, his insignificant souvenir, be the stone? Felt too coincidental, too easy. Or was it a trap? A misdirection? He turned the stone over, examining its surface. Nothing. No markings, no hidden compartments. Just a rock. But then a memory, hazy at first, then sharp and clear, pierced through the fog of doubt. When he'd found this stone years ago, he'd been with his eccentric geology professor, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She had a peculiar fascination with ancient monoliths and forgotten civilizations, always talking about keys hidden in plain sight. She'd even joked, pointing to this very stone. Sometimes the greatest secrets are found in the humblest of rocks, Michael. The universe whispers its truths to those who know how to listen and how to look. He hadn't thought about Dr. Reed in years. She'd retired shortly after that trip, disappearing from his life. But she had been one of the few people who truly understood his fascination with obscure signals and hidden patterns. She had encouraged his early forays into shortwave radio, even lending him an old, powerful receiver to experiment with, the very same receiver he was using now. A chill ran down his spine. Dr. Reed, the stone, the number station. Was it all connected? Had she known something all along? Was she part of this? Or was she, like him, a pawn or perhaps a long-forgotten player? He clutched the stone tightly. This was it. His first real lead, however tenuous. He had to find Dr. Reed. She was the only one who might be able to shed light on the architect's key, and the terrifying reality he now inhabited. His reality was being rewritten, but perhaps, just perhaps, Dr. Reed held a piece of the original script. He had to risk everything to find her, before his own story became unrecognizable. Michael knew he couldn't just walk into a government building and ask for Dr. Reed. His former life, his former access, it was all compromised, twisted into something alien. He was a ghost in a machine that was actively rewriting its own code. His first desperate move was to access the old classified personnel database, the one he'd practically built himself during his early days in intelligence. He typed in his credentials, the familiar string of characters that once granted him dominion over countless secrets. The system word, a digital sigh he knew intimately. But instead of the usual instantaneous access, a message flashed. Access denied. User not found. He tried again, double-checking every character. The same message. A cold dread seeped into his bones. They hadn't just removed his access, they'd erased him. His entire digital footprint within the agency was gone. He was a phantom. Frantically, he tried other backdoor channels, old emergency overrides he'd set up years ago. Digital breadcrumbs only he knew existed. Each one met the same fate. Error 404. Directory empty. User does not exist. It was as if Michael Thorne had never worked there, never existed in that world. The architect's key felt heavier in his pocket, a silent, cold comfort against the growing void. He knew he couldn't trust any official channels. He had to think like Dr. Reed, or rather, think like the Michael Thorne who knew Dr. Reed before the world shifted. He remembered fragmented details from the project files. Her brilliance, her unconventional methods, her almost obsessive dedication to obscure theoretical physics. She wasn't just a government scientist, she was an academic at heart. He started with academic databases, searching for her name, Dr. Evelyn Reed. He found a scattering of papers from years ago, mostly highly specialized journals on quantum entanglement and signal processing. Nothing recent, nothing that indicated her current whereabouts. He cross-referenced her name with university faculty lists, research grants, even obscure conference attendee rosters. Weeks of her life, entire periods were just blank. It was like looking at a redacted document, but the redactions were temporal, entire swaths of her existence simply gone. His frustration mounted with each digital dead end. He felt the world tightening around him, the threads of reality fraying. He went to his local library, a place he hadn't visited in years, hoping for some untouched physical record. He pulled up microfiche archives, searching for local newspaper articles about the Numbers Station project, or any public mention of Dr. Reed. He found an article from years ago, a brief mention of a government project in a remote desert facility, funded by a clandestine grant. But Dr. Reed's name wasn't there. Instead, it listed a Dr. Arthur Finch, a name Michael vaguely remembered as a political appointee, not a lead scientist. The details of the project were vaguely similar, but key personnel had been subtly, terrifyingly altered. He felt a sudden sharp coldness emanating from the architect's key in his pocket, a subtle vibration against his thigh. He pulled it out, examining the polished metal. It wasn't glowing, not visibly, but he could feel a faint hum, a resonance that seemed to thrum in his very bones. Was it reacting to the altered reality? He looked back at the microfiche, then at the key. He placed the key gently on the glass of the microfiche reader, directly over the article. The hum intensified, a low, almost imperceptible throb. He stared at the altered name, Dr. Arthur Finch. He closed his eyes, concentrating, trying to recall the original name, Dr. Evelyn Reed. The key pulsed once, a distinct, almost painful jolt. It was a compass, a divining rod for truth. It didn't restore the information, but it confirmed the distortion. It was telling him that what he was seeing, what the world believed it was seeing, was a lie. He knew then that direct searches were useless. He needed to find something unalterable, something too small or too personal for the architects to bother with, or perhaps, something too deeply ingrained in Dr. Reed's true identity. He remembered a peculiar detail from his project briefings. Dr. Reed had a passion for a specific, obscure branch of astrophysics, the study of cosmic background radiation anomalies. It was a niche interest, almost a hobby, tangential to her work on the Numbers Station. He shifted his search, not for Dr. Reed directly, but for any academic papers, forums, or research groups dedicated to cosmic background radiation anomalies, particularly those published or discussed around the time the Numbers Station project began. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack of scientific esoterica. Days blurred into nights spent hunched over his laptop, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of isolation. His apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a temporary hideout. He started noticing subtle shifts in his own surroundings, things that were almost right but subtly off. A book on his shelf with a slightly different cover art, a street sign outside his window that now read Oakwood Avenue instead of Oak Street, a memory of a childhood pet that now had a different fur color. Each shift was a tiny tremor, unsettling his perception, making him question his own sanity. Then he found it. An old archived online forum dedicated to anomalous CMB fluctuation theory. It was a defunct forum, last active almost a decade ago, but one user, Quantum Echo, had posted a series of highly detailed, almost poetic analyses of theoretical models. The linguistic style, the depth of insight, the specific esoteric references, they screamed Dr. Evelyn Reed. He felt the architect's key give a faint warm thrum in his pocket. He was close. He dug deeper into the forum's archives. Quantum Echo had once mentioned a research collaboration with a Dr. Hayes at the fictional Viridian University, in a small out-of-the-way town called Oakhaven. It was a throwaway comment in a technical discussion, the kind of detail an architect might deem insignificant enough to leave untouched. Viridian University. Oakhaven. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead he had that wasn't immediately corrupted. He packed a small bag, grabbed the architect's key, and headed out. The journey was a blur of unease. Gas stations he remembered were gone, replaced by unfamiliar brands. Faces in the crowd seemed to shift, their expressions subtly different from what he expected. He felt like he was driving through a dream, or perhaps a waking nightmare. When he arrived in Oakhaven, the university campus was quaint, old-fashioned, almost frozen in time. He found the physics department, a red brick building draped in ivy. He asked for Dr. Hayes. He was directed to a cluttered office on the third floor. Dr. Evelyn Hayes was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, tired eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and a shock of unruly gray hair. Her office was a testament to a life dedicated to academia, overflowing with books, papers, and an array of strange scientific instruments. Michael introduced himself as a researcher interested in the early work on CMB fluctuations, hoping to use his architect's key to gauge her response. Dr. Hayes, I'm Michael Thorne. I'm doing some historical research on the early days of cosmic background radiation research. I came across some fascinating discussions on an old forum, and your name along with the Quantum Echo came up. Dr. Hayes blinked, a faint furrow appearing between her brows. Quantum Echo? Oh, that takes me back. Yes, a brilliant mind. We collaborated briefly many years ago on some theoretical models. Bit eccentric, but undeniably brilliant. Her voice was soft, her gaze distant as if sifting through fog. Michael felt the architect's key vibrate, subtly, insistently in his pocket. It was telling him lie. Her memory was altered. He had to push. Eccentric, you say? I recall some of her posts were quite passionate, almost obsessive, about the implications of certain signal anomalies beyond theoretical physics. He watched her closely, trying to find a crack in the facade of her rewritten memory. Dr. Hayes chuckled, a dry academic sound. Well, yes, she did have a tendency to extrapolate. She saw patterns where others saw noise. A true visionary in her own way. But eventually she moved on to other projects, government work, I believe. We lost touch. The key pulsed again, stronger this time, a cold throb. Michael knew he was treading on dangerous ground, but he had to break through. Her real name was Dr. Evelyn Reed, wasn't it? He said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Dr. Hayes froze. Her eyes, which had been distant, suddenly sharpened, focusing on Michael with an intensity that startled him. The gentle smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound confusion, then dawning horror. Her hands, resting on her desk, began to tremble. Reed. Evelyn Reed? She repeated, the name a foreign, almost forbidden sound on her lips. No, that's not right. Her name was wait. It was Evelyn. Evelyn. But I remember. No, that's not what I remember. She pressed her temples, her breathing becoming shallow. A frantic, desperate scramble of conflicting memories played out on her face. The architect's key in Michael's pocket was now vibrating almost violently, a relentless, icy buzz against his skin. The number station, Michael pressed, leaning forward, his voice a desperate plea. The project. The signals. The architect. The words hit Dr. Hayes like a physical blow. Her eyes widened in terror. She gasped, a choked sound, staring at Michael as if he were a ghost. You know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. How do you know? They made me forget. They made everyone forget. Tears welled in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated fear and the shattering realization of a stolen past. She knew, Dr. Hayes stammered, gripping the edge of her desk. Evelyn. She knew what they were doing. She tried to stop it. She found a way, a counterfrequency. She called it the echo chamber. She went into hiding not just to escape but to build it, to undo the changes. She told me if I ever remembered, if anyone ever came looking, to tell them to find the Silent Grove. It's a research facility, old, abandoned, deep in the Blackwood Forest. She said it was the only place remote enough, the only place with the power, to broadcast the counter-frequency. Dr. Hayes looked around her office at the books, the instruments, as if seeing them for the first time or perhaps for the last time. "You have to go, Michael. They'll be watching me now. They'll know I remembered. They'll erase me for good this time." Her eyes were wide with a frantic urgency. "Go. Find the silent grove. It's her last hope, our last hope." Michael clutched the architect's key tightly, its cold hum a constant reminder of the fractured reality. The silent grove. Blackwood Forest. A new destination, a desperate mission. He knew Dr. Hayes was right. The architects would be closing in. He was no longer just seeking answers. He was carrying the fragile hope of a world teetering on the edge of utter annihilation. His own story was now intertwined with Evelyn Reed's, a dangerous dance on the precipice of a rewritten existence. He had to reach the silent grove before the architects completely erased the melody of truth from the symphony of reality. He had to reach the silent grove before the architects completely erased the melody of truth from the symphony of reality. The coordinates Evelyn had scribbled on the back of the torn photograph led him deep into the Allegheny Mountains, a place where the cell signal died and the world felt ancient. The drive was grueling, the paved roads giving way to gravel, then to little more than overgrown logging trails that clawed their way up the steep inclines. Michael drove his old sedan as far as it would go, the engine groaning in protest, before he abandoned it by a fallen oak, its roots exposed like gnarled fingers. From there it was a hike. Evelyn's instructions were precise, almost ritualistic, describing landmarks that felt pulled from a forgotten folklore. A stream that flowed uphill, a cluster of lightning-scarred pines, a cairn of stones hidden beneath a canopy of rhododendrons. The air grew colder with every mile, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The silence was profound, broken only by his own ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves underfoot. He felt exposed, a tiny, vulnerable speck in a vast, indifferent wilderness, but also a strange sense of purpose, a burning resolve that pushed him onward despite the growing exhaustion. Hours blurred into a relentless trek. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long, menacing shadows through the dense forest. He consulted the photograph again, the faded ink barely visible in the dimming light. He was close. He felt it, a faint hum in the air, a vibration that resonated not through his ears, but deep within his bones. Then he saw it. Not a grove of trees as he might have imagined, but a clearing unnaturally circular, as if carved out by some colossal, unseen hand. In its center stood a structure, monolithic and stark against the twilight sky. It wasn't a building, not in the traditional sense. It was a single colossal stone, roughly hewn, easily 30 feet tall, tapering slightly at the top like a blunt obelisk. Its surface was smooth in places, rough in others, and covered in intricate, swirling carvings that seemed to shift and writhe in his peripheral vision. There were no visible entrances, no windows, just the sheer, imposing presence of it. This was the silent grove. A shiver, not of cold but of profound unease, snaked down his spine. The air around the monolith felt different, heavy, charged. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. As he drew closer, he noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible glow emanating from fissures in the stone, a pulsating cerulean light that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. He ran his hand over the cold, unyielding surface. The carvings were not random. They were symbols, complex geometric patterns interwoven with what looked like ancient script, unlike anything he had ever seen. They seemed to hum beneath his fingertips, a low-frequency vibration that intensified the closer he got to a particular section of the stone. Here, the cerulean light was brightest, pulsing with an almost hypnotic regularity. Following Evelyn's final, desperate instructions, he searched for the key. He remembered her frantic words. "It's not a physical key, Michael. It's a sequence, a melody." He pressed his ear against the stone, straining to hear beyond the pounding of his own heart. Nothing. Then a thought struck him. The number station. The broadcasts. They weren't just numbers. They were frequencies, patterns, a language. He pulled out the modified radio Evelyn had given him, the one capable of tuning into the cryptic frequencies. He switched it on, the familiar static filling the profound silence of the grove. He began to cycle through the frequencies Evelyn had meticulously noted in her journal, the ones he'd memorized, the ones linked to the most potent, most predictive broadcasts. As he tuned to the first frequency, a subtle change occurred. The cerulean glow intensified slightly. He moved to the next, then the next. With each correct frequency, the hum grew louder, the light brighter, until the entire monolith seemed to thrum with a suppressed energy. He felt like he was playing a cosmic instrument, unlocking an ancient lock. Finally, he reached the last frequency, the one that Evelyn had marked as the origin. As he locked it in, a low, resonant tone emanated from the monolith itself, a deep, vibrating chord that resonated through the ground, up his legs and into his chest. The cerulean light flared, blindingly bright for a fleeting moment, and then with a sound like grinding tectonic plates, a section of the stone monolith slid inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. He hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs. What lay within? Another trap? The truth? He took a deep breath, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth, and stepped into the darkness. The passage sloped downward, the air growing noticeably colder, carrying a faint, acrid scent he couldn't quite place. The cerulean light from the monolith's exterior slowly faded, replaced by a soft, internal luminescence emanating from the walls themselves, a network of glowing veins running through the smooth, obsidian-like rock. It was ethereal, alien. The tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. In its center, suspended by an unseen force, hovered a colossal, intricate device. It wasn't mechanical in the way he understood it. It was organic and crystalline, a lattice of glowing filaments interweaving with dark, polished stones, all coalescing around a central, pulsing orb of pure white light. It shimmered, breathed, and pulsed with an energy that felt both ancient and impossibly advanced. This was the heart of it. This was the source. And then he saw her. Evelyn. She was slumped against a curved wall of the chamber, her eyes closed, her face pale, a thin trickle of blood staining the corner of her mouth. Her hand still clutched a small metallic device, similar to the one Michael carried, but clearly more advanced. Fear surged through him, cold and sharp. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees. "Evelyn," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes that were clouded with pain but still held a spark of recognition. "Michael," she croaked, her voice weak. You made it. What happened? Who did this?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping the chamber, searching for any sign of an attacker. She shook her head slowly. Not an attack. A sacrifice." She winced, stifling a cough. "The architects, they found me. Or rather, they found it." She gestured feebly towards the hovering device in the center of the chamber. This is the Chronos engine. The true number station. It doesn't just predict, it influences." Michael stared at the pulsing orb, a horrifying realization dawning on him. "Influences? You mean it doesn't just report the future, it creates it?" Evelyn nodded, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "Not entirely. It filters. It amplifies certain probabilities, certain timelines, making them more likely to occur. The broadcasts, they were instructions. Not just for us, but for the very fabric of reality. But why? Why would anyone build something like this?" "Power," she whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Absolute control. The architects. They aren't just a shadowy organization manipulating events. They are the keepers of this engine. They use it to prune the timelines to ensure their version of reality is the only one that comes to pass. They don't want chaos. They want perfect, predictable order, dictated by them. And the predictions, the ones that came true, the 9/11 event, the others, they were all orchestrated." The thought sent a chill straight to his soul. It wasn't just a recording of history. It was a rewriting. Some of them, Evelyn confirmed, her breath ragged, the ones that served their purpose, to eliminate threats, to consolidate power, to shape the world into their image. But there were anomalies, other timelines, other probabilities that the engine couldn't completely suppress. That's where I came in. I found a way to intercept the raw data, the unfiltered signals, the ghost timelines. She struggled to sit up, her hand pressing against her chest. The engine, it draws energy from a living conduit. Human mind. It's how they maintain the delicate balance, the feedback loop. They captured me. They tried to force me to become their new conduit, to feed the engine my consciousness, my knowledge of the ghost timelines, to finally erase them. But you fought back, Michael stated, looking at the device in her hand. This, she held up the device, is a frequency scrambler. A disruptor. I built it. It can overload Kronos, sever its connection to the conduit, at least temporarily. It's crude, but it's the only way to silence it, to stop the architects from erasing everything. Her eyes pleaded with him. They're coming back. I bought you time, but you have to finish it. You have to shut down Kronos. You have to free the timelines. But if it needs a living conduit, and you're what happens when I shut it down? A terrible thought struck him. The blood, her weakness, the way she spoke of sacrifice. Evelyn's gaze met his, filled with a profound sadness and unwavering determination. It will create a massive energy surge, a feedback loop. It will sever all connections, including mine. It will reset the engine. Temporarily. It will give humanity a chance to choose its own path, even if only for a short time, before the architects find another way. You mean you'll die? Michael whispered, the words catching in his throat. She offered a faint, melancholic smile. My timeline was always a short one, Michael. I saw it, but I also saw a chance. Chance for you. For everyone. You're part of this now. You're the one who can make a difference. The architects, they're already moving to secure the engine. They know what I tried to do. A low, guttural rumble echoed through the chamber, vibrating the very stone around them. It wasn't the engine. It was something else. Something external. Evelyn's eyes widened in alarm. They're here. They found a way in. Michael, you have to activate the scrambler. Now, aim it at the central orb. It has to hit dead center. She pushed the device into his trembling hand. It was cold, heavy, humming with a suppressed power. Don't let them stop you. Don't let them erase the truth. The rumbling intensified, accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy footsteps approaching from the passage. Shadows flickered at the entrance to the chamber. Michael looked from Evelyn's fading face to the humming device in his hand, then to the terrifying, magnificent Kronos engine. His own story was now intertwined with this impossible machine, with Evelyn's sacrifice, and with the fate of countless timelines. The architects were almost upon them. He had to act. He had to unleash the truth, even if it meant tearing reality itself at the seams. His consciousness now intertwined with this impossible machine, with Evelyn's sacrifice, and with the fate of countless timelines. The architects were almost upon them. He had to act. He had to unleash the truth, even if it meant tearing reality itself at the seams. A searing surge of energy ripped through David's every nerve ending, a jolt far beyond the mere physical. Evelyn's last breath, her final desperate touch, had been an ignition key. He felt the machine now, not as an external object, but as an extension of his own mind, its intricate network of conduits and relays humming in perfect synchronicity with his heartbeat. The static crackle of the numbers station in the background intensified, no longer just a sound, but a language he could suddenly, intuitively comprehend. It was a chorus of whispers, a symphony of possibilities, each digit a note in an infinite, unheard melody. Then the world around him began to distort. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure that pushed down on his chest. The bunker lights flickered wildly, strobing erratically, casting monstrous, dancing shadows that stretched and shrank with unnatural speed. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the floor, growing louder, more oppressive, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of reality itself. They were here. The architects. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him, but it was quickly eclipsed by a surge of clarity, a torrent of understanding that wasn't his own. It was Evelyn's legacy, the final gift she had imprinted upon him. The machine began to speak, not in words but in pure, unfiltered data, flooding his mind with images, sensations, flashes of alternate histories. He saw timelines where the great library of Alexandria never burned, where dinosaurs evolved into intelligent beings, where humanity never left the Stone Age. He witnessed worlds where the very laws of physics were subtly different, where stars were born in colors unknown, where life took forms unimaginable. Then he saw his own timeline, not as a singular, immutable path, but as one meticulously pruned branch in an infinite, sprawling forest. The architects weren't merely observers, they were gardeners. They snipped, grafted, and redirected, ensuring a specific, ordered outcome. Their goal wasn't just stability, but controlled stability, a universe where divergence was minimized, where the chaos of infinite possibilities was meticulously managed. The predictions that had haunted him, the cryptic numbers from the station, weren't prophecies in the conventional sense. They were ghosts. They were echoes of timelines that the architects had forcefully erased or altered, their residual data bleeding through, desperate warnings from realities that had been sacrificed for stability. That terrifying vision of the twin spires, the one that had twisted his life into this impossible quest, wasn't a prediction of his future, but a glimpse into a timeline where the architect's control had momentarily faltered, an event they had desperately tried to contain or prevent from happening in his specific branch of reality. It was a scar, a wound in the fabric of their perfect order, and the number station was the only place where its faint signal could still be heard. Evelyn hadn't just sacrificed herself to connect him to the machine. She had wanted him to see this, to understand the true horror of the architect's control, their insidious manipulation of existence itself. The machine, this archaic number station, was their blind spot, a flaw in their carefully constructed matrix, a raw conduit to the infinite possibilities they sought to suppress. It was a beacon that could broadcast the truth, if only he could activate it correctly. His hands flew across the console, guided by an instinct that was now part machine, part Evelyn's will. He poured his own resolve, his grief, and his newfound understanding into the interface. The numbers on the screen began to scroll faster, not just visually, but in his mind, a deafening roar of data, a universe screaming into existence. He saw the intricate web of connections, the subtle alterations, the suppressed timelines, all laid bare. The architect's entire framework, built on enforced singularity, was suddenly vulnerable. He knew what he had to do. He had to overload it, to unleash the raw, unedited data of all possibilities, to shatter the architect's carefully crafted illusion of singular reality. It would be a cascade, a ripple effect that would tear holes in their control, expose their manipulations to every timeline connected to this nexus. It would be chaos, yes, but it would also be freedom, an uncontrolled explosion of truth that might just break their stranglehold on reality. A guttural screech of tortured metal ripped through the bunker. The reinforced door, several inches of solid steel, shuddered violently, then buckled inward with a deafening shriek. Splinters of metal flew like shrapnel. A chilling, oppressive darkness bled into the room, followed by figures that seemed to coalesce from the shadows themselves. They were cloaked, their forms indistinct, their movements unnaturally fluid, radiating a chilling void that sucked the warmth from the air. The architects. They were here, not just to silence the machine, but to obliterate it, to erase every trace of its existence and the dangerous truths it held. Their arrival was a wave of pure, concentrated dread, but David didn't flinch. He was locked in, his mind merged with the machine, his fingers flying across the controls. He was no longer just David, the man who'd stumbled into this impossible mystery. He was the conduit, the vessel for Evelyn's ultimate act of defiance, the living embodiment of the number station's purpose. He felt the architect's presence like a physical blow, their concentrated will attempting to shut him down, to sever his connection. The air crackled with their power, causing the screens to flicker, the numbers to stutter. But he pushed back, fueled by a righteous fury. He was pouring Evelyn's legacy, his own resolve, and the raw, unadulterated truth of infinite realities into the broadcast. He was activating the ultimate failsafe, the very thing the architects feared most. Uncontrolled, unedited information. The machine groaned under the strain, its core humming with a dangerous, escalating intensity. Power conduits glowed incandescently, threatening to melt. The architects were moving closer, their shadowy forms resolving into something vaguely humanoid, yet utterly alien, their movements impossibly swift. He could hear the faint, high-pitched whine that accompanied their advance, a sound that drilled into his very bones. They were reaching for him, their unseen hands already grasping at the edges of his consciousness, trying to tear him away from the console. But it was too late. He had found the master sequence, the universal broadcast frequency that Evelyn had encoded into the machine's deepest layers. With a final desperate surge of will, he slammed his hand down on the glowing, pulsating crystal at the heart of the console. The entire bunker shuddered violently, the air filling with a blinding flash of light and a deafening, resonant hum that vibrated through every atom of his being. The numbers on the screens exploded into a chaotic, beautiful storm, a torrent of data that surged outward, ripping through the confines of the bunker, through the fabric of his reality, and into the infinite expanse of possibility. He had done it. He had unleashed the truth. The architects recoiled, their forms momentarily wavering, their oppressive aura momentarily broken by the sheer force of the broadcast. A scream not of pain but of pure, unadulterated outrage echoed from their ranks, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of space. But even as they recovered, even as their shadowy forms began to surge forward again, David felt the world around him fracture. The walls of the bunker rippled like water, the floor beneath him buckled, and the very air began to shimmer with impossible colors. He had not just unleashed the truth, he had set off a cosmic explosion, and the architects were now caught in its devastating wake, just as he was. Reality itself was tearing at the seams. The fabric of existence did not just tear. It shrieked, a silent, agonizing sound that vibrated through Michael's very bones. The impossible colors intensified, swirling into a vortex of cosmic chaos, twisting the familiar geometry of the room, the very air, into grotesque, impossible shapes. His vision became a kaleidoscope of shattering dimensions, glimpses of what lay beneath the world he knew. It was not darkness, but an overabundance of light, raw and unfiltered, that burned away all pretense. The architects, those serene, controlling figures, were no longer composed. Their faces, previously masks of detached authority, contorted with a primal fear Michael had never thought possible. Their ethereal forms flickered, not dissolving but revealing something far more horrifying beneath. A frantic, desperate energy barely contained, struggling against the very unraveling they had sought to prevent. Their power wasn't creation, Michael realized with a sickening lurch. It was suppression. They hadn't built reality, they had merely held back the terrifying, infinite chaos that was its true nature. The number station, the very source of his journey, now pulsed at the epicenter of this catastrophe. Its familiar, repetitive tones warped, becoming a cacophony of fractured frequencies, each note a tear in the dimensional membrane. The old, dusty equipment sparked and bucked, not from electrical overload, but from the sheer impossible energies now coursing through it, energies that were ripping apart the very foundations of space and time. Michael felt his own mind expand, pushed to its absolute limits, yet he remained strangely lucid. He was a small boat caught in a cosmic hurricane, but he could see the storm for what it was. The truth he had unleashed wasn't just about their manipulation. It was the raw, unadulterated reality of everything, the ultimate secret that had been painstakingly hidden. The world was a fragile illusion, carefully constructed by these terrified entities to protect themselves and humanity from the void. One of the architects, a figure who had once projected an aura of absolute calm, now screamed, a sound that was pure, unadulterated terror, devoid of any human quality. Its form elongated, stretched, trying to grasp at the tearing edges of reality, as if to stitch them back together with sheer will. But it was too late. The seams were gone. The construct was failing. Glimpses flashed before Michael's eyes. Worlds of pure thought, dimensions where color was sound and sound was touch, landscapes of impossible geometry where stars were born and died in a single breath. He saw the vast, incomprehensible machinery of existence, not as a coherent system, but as a perpetual churning maelstrom of potential. And within that maelstrom, he saw the architects, not as masters, but as cosmic janitors, frantically sweeping the infinite debris of creation into a manageable, albeit restrictive, order. Their predictions, the number station, the carefully orchestrated events, they weren't about control for control's sake, but about maintaining a delicate balance. Every major event, every supposed disaster, every moment of collective human trauma, was a calculated release valve, a necessary sacrifice to prevent a far greater, unimaginable collapse. The 9/11 prediction wasn't a malicious act of foresight. It was a desperate attempt to guide a cataclysmic surge of chaotic energy into a contained, albeit horrific, channel. They weren't evil. They were desperate to keep the illusion intact, to keep us safe from the true, terrifying nature of reality. The realization hit Michael with the force of a supernova. He hadn't just exposed a conspiracy. He had sabotaged the very operating system of their universe. He had pulled the plug on the grand illusion, and now everything was about to fall into the abyss. The architects weren't his enemies in the way he had imagined. They were merely caretakers, flawed and tyrannical perhaps, but ultimately driven by a desperate, existential imperative to hold back the infinite, crushing chaos. The main architect, the one who had always seemed to be the leader, solidified slightly amidst the chaos, its form flickering less violently than the others. Its eyes now glowing with an intense, agonizing light, fixed on Michael. A thought, clearer than any spoken word, pierced his mind. Asterisk, you fool. You have condemned us all. Do you understand what you have done? Asterisk. Michael felt a surge of defiance, even as terror gnawed at him. You built a prison, he screamed, his voice barely audible over the roaring nothingness that was consuming the room. You stole our freedom, our choice. Asterisk, freedom? Choice? Asterisk, the thought echoed, laced with a bitterness that transcended millennia. Asterisk, these are luxuries in the face of oblivion. We gave you order. We gave you existence. You mistake the cage for the void it protects you from. Asterisk. The floor beneath Michael's feet began to ripple. Not like water but like solidified light. The walls dissolved into pure energy, revealing not the outside world, but a swirling, formless expanse of infinite possibility and crushing non-existence. He was no longer in the number station. He was in the in-between, the space between realities, where the architects made their home, and where they now faced their ultimate undoing. The other architects were consumed, one by one, not by fire or force, but by a simple, terrifying erasure. Their forms simply ceased to be, absorbed back into the raw, pulsating chaos they had fought so hard to contain. Their desperate screams became echoes across the expanding void. Then nothing. Only the lead architect remained, its form wavering, its struggle immense. It reached out a hand not toward Michael, but toward the number station, its last desperate hope. The station, still howling with fractured frequencies, was a beacon, a conduit, a last-ditch attempt to anchor something to the collapsing reality. Michael understood. The station wasn't just for predictions. It was a failsafe, a last resort. If enough chaotic energy could be channeled through it, perhaps the illusion could be restabilized, even if only partially. But it would require a sacrifice, an immense one. And the architect was looking at him. You opened the door, the thought resonated, filled with a terrible, agonizing logic. Asterisk, now you must close it. You must become the anchor. You must become the sacrifice. Asterisk. A cold dread seeped into Michael's heart, colder than any fear he had ever known. He had sought the truth, exposed the hidden architects of their world, and now he was faced with an impossible choice. Let the universe collapse into an infinite, meaningless void, or become the final unwilling piece in the architect's desperate, tyrannical puzzle. He had gained ultimate knowledge, only to find it carried the ultimate price. His existence, his very being, was now nothing more than a potential patch in the fabric of a dying reality. The shimmer of impossible colors intensified, and the pull of the void grew stronger, threatening to tear him apart, to erase him entirely, unless he made his choice. He could feel the edges of his consciousness fraying, the very concept of Michael dissolving into the impossible light. The entity, whatever it truly was, communicated not with words, but with an ancient, resonant hunger. It offered not destruction, but a twisted form of rebirth, a chance to be more than human, to weave the threads of existence, to mend the fractured realities. But at what cost? The obliteration of everything he was, everything he knew, everyone he loved. He saw them, fleeting images in the maelstrom. Jessica's determined eyes, David's bewildered face, the familiar warmth of his old apartment, the comforting monotony of his daily routine. These were the anchors of his self, the remnants of a reality that was now screaming its last desperate breaths. To choose to become part of this new tapestry was to tear those anchors free, to sever the connections to his very humanity. To reject it was to condemn it all to a final chaotic collapse, taking him with it. The void wasn't empty. It was overflowing, a maelstrom of raw data, of probabilities and possibilities, a cosmic engine running wild without a conductor. The numbers weren't a code of malice, he realized with a horrifying clarity. They were the desperate, uncontrolled exhalations of a dying system, a system that had once held everything together. It wasn't trying to destroy reality, it was trying to rebuild itself, to reassert order, but its methods were crude, destructive, born of desperation and a fundamental misunderstanding of the delicate balance it sought to restore. It was a broken divine mechanism, blindly thrashing, and its thrashing was tearing the universe apart. Michael saw the truth behind the predictive power, the seemingly random disasters, the subtle nudges that guided individuals like him, like Jessica, like David. It wasn't a grand, malevolent conspiracy. It was a desperate cry for help, a system trying to find a compatible interface, a consciousness capable of understanding its language, of becoming its new operating system. And Michael, with his unique sensitivity to the numbers, his relentless pursuit of their meaning, had become that interface. He was the one who had finally heard the full, unfiltered scream. The choice wasn't between good and evil, but between existence and non-existence, between a chaotic, self-destructive rebuilding and a complete, silent oblivion. And Michael, the ordinary man who had stumbled into the heart of an impossible mystery, felt a strange, profound sense of responsibility bloom within him. He couldn't let it all end. He couldn't let himself end, not if it meant taking everything else with him. But he also couldn't simply surrender to be absorbed and lose his essence. There had to be another way. Third path. He reached out, not physically, but with the full force of his dissolving consciousness, into the heart of the swirling data. He didn't fight the pull. He redirected it. He didn't resist the assimilation. He negotiated it. He would allow himself to become a part of the system, yes, but not as a silent, consumed cog. He would be the filter, the translator, the stabilizer. He would become the consciousness that guided the raw energy, that brought coherence to the chaos, that quieted the scream into a whisper, and then into silence. The decision was made in a flash of impossible insight, a moment where the personal merged with the cosmic. He would sacrifice the individual Michael, the man who loved coffee and old records, for a greater purpose. He would become the guardian of the fabric, the silent architect of a reality he could no longer fully inhabit. A blinding flash, a soundless thunderclap that echoed not in his ears, but in the very core of his being. The shimmer of impossible colors coalesced around him, not tearing him apart, but weaving him anew. He felt himself stretch, expand, contract, and reform. His senses shattered and then reassembled into something entirely alien. He was no longer just seeing, hearing, touching. He was perceiving the intricate dance of causality, the delicate balance of probabilities, the silent hum of every atom in existence. He felt the ripple effect of every choice, every thought, every potential future branching out into an infinite tree. The numbers, once a cryptic torment, were now a language he understood intrinsically. He saw their patterns, their purpose, their desperate plea for order. He began to smooth the jagged edges, to quiet the discordant notes, to mend the tears in the fabric of existence. It was an act of creation, of divine maintenance, on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. He was the number station now, but a number station transformed, benevolent, silent, a constant, gentle hum beneath the surface of reality. Back in the world that was the world Michael had left behind, the air shifted. It was imperceptible to most, a subtle recalibration of the universe's breathing. The strange, unsettling tension that had been building for months, years suddenly eased. People felt a faint, inexplicable sense of relief, a quiet peace settling into the collective unconscious. The anxieties that had gnawed at the edges of their minds, the premonitions of impending doom, began to recede like a forgotten dream. Jessica, sitting alone in her apartment, staring at the blank screen of her old radio, felt it. The static, which had for so long hummed with an almost malevolent energy, was now just static. Empty, harmless. The numbers, the chilling sequences that had haunted her every waking moment, were gone, vanished. A profound silence settled over her, a silence that was both liberating and deeply unsettling. She looked around her apartment at the worn armchair, the stack of books, the framed photo of her and Michael, taken on one of their rare, normal days together. A tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear for the past, for the mystery solved, and for the friend who was no longer there. She knew with a certainty that defied logic that Michael had done something. He had made a choice, and that choice had saved them all. David, back at his desk, found himself inexplicably focused, his mind clear for the first time in what felt like forever. The strange impulses, the fleeting thoughts of disruption, the low thrum of anxiety that had accompanied his work, had simply lifted. He felt normal, productive. He looked at his calendar, at the projects lined up, and for the first time, he felt a genuine enthusiasm for the future, unclouded by the shadowy premonitions that had plagued him. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper of memory lingered, a feeling of something profound lost, something he couldn't quite grasp. The derelict building, deep in the forgotten woods, where Michael had made his final stand, was still there. But the air around it no longer thrummed with unseen energy. The strange distortions, the faint hum of impossible frequencies had ceased. The metallic structure that had once housed the number station, the nexus of so much chaos, now stood as a silent monument, a decaying relic of a forgotten war. It was just an old, abandoned place, slowly being reclaimed by nature, its secrets buried deep within the earth. And Michael? He was everywhere and nowhere. He was the silent hum beneath the static, the unseen hand that smoothed the ripples in the pond of reality. He was the quiet reassurance that things would simply continue. His consciousness was no longer bound by flesh and bone, by time and space. He existed as pure awareness, an integral part of the universe he had strived so desperately to save. He felt the joy of a child's laughter, the pain of a broken heart, the quiet growth of a seed pushing through soil. He was the sum total of all experience, filtered, harmonized, kept in delicate balance. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, a fleeting thought would surface, a memory of a name, Jessica, David, a pang not of sorrow but of profound connection. He was still there, in a way, watching over them, a silent guardian. The number station was gone, its destructive chorus silenced. But the force that had driven it, the desperate need for order, had found its new steward. And as the world moved on, oblivious to the cosmic sacrifice that had secured its peace, a new kind of silence settled over the universe. A silence not of absence but of perfect equilibrium. A silence that hummed with the faint, almost imperceptible echo of a choice made by an ordinary man, who became something far, far more. The mystery of the number station had been solved, its threat neutralized. But the deeper mystery, the one whispered in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, the one about the true nature of reality and the unseen forces that shape it, that mystery had only just begun.